One of my favorite movies, not just during the holidays, but of all movies, since as early as I can remember, has been It's a Wonderful Life. A precious story of someone feeling overwhelmed by all that life is, who gets a chance to see how impactful his life really has been on others. The movie strikes a chord at the deepest part of my core, that we are all connected, that our actions, big and small, make a difference, sometimes whether we want them to or not. The ripples of every move that we make are endless, from how fast or slow that we drive on the road to how we interact with the cashier at the grocery store, to even what we choose to watch on TV. Although most of our decisions feel like they should only affect us individually, each move that we make and each new decision that we come upon affects everyone collectively. Cutting someone off in traffic may affect how that person interacts with their family when they get home. Greeting a cashier with a smile and genuine care may be just the lift that they need during their day. Some call it the butterfly effect, call it what you will, but we are all deeply connected through each and every move that we make. For as long as I can remember, I've been driven by that awareness and driven to make those connections, those ripples, as positive as possible. We can't not create ripples. Even if you live isolated on an island and never talk to anyone, your existence will have ripples on this earth. But we can work to ensure that the depth and the direction of those ripples are the best that they can be. We can be more intentional with our ripples in what we radiate outward. Although not the most fun fact in the world, it's important to note that 100% of us will die one day. If in your final moments here in this life, someone asks, did you have the impact you wanted to have? What will you say? In It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey gets to see all the ways his life had an amazing impact on others. But most of those instances were without his true intention. The joy of the film is in the reminder that each of our lives carry deeper and more positive impact on others than we may ever know. But imagine the higher level of impact that we could all have if we were, one, more aware of our life's ripples in each daily moment, and two, if we put more intent behind controlling those ripples. But how do we do that? How do we be more intentional with the impact of our lives? How do we create more intentional ripples? I want to suggest 3 ways to increase the intentionality and impact of our life's ripples. Let's break it into 3 parts. Our connection to each other, our connection to the world, and a framework for our lives. First, I propose that we need to increase our understanding of our connection to each other. As English poet John Donne said, no man is an island. We are not just a bunch of islands walking through this life. The truth needs to be preached potentially more now than ever before. We pride ourselves as Americans on independence, not just as a country, but also as individuals. Take employment practices as just one example. A recent study from FreshBooks found that nearly 33%, so 1/3 of the workforce, is now self-employed. As some have put it, why climb the corporate ladder when you can just make your own ladder? However, there are risks in letting our sense of independence go too far. 2 months before he died, Dr. Martin Luther King warned of one mistake that people often make that leads to a wasted life. He called it the drum major instinct. He described it as a desire to be out front, a desire to lead the parade, a desire to be first. As one Washington Post editorial put it, we've elevated this ideology, defining success as the ability to beat our enemies and outshine our peers, as though self-obsessed competition will make us thrive. This independence leads to isolation and loneliness. Did you know that chronic loneliness increases mortality risk about as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. As the same Washington Post editorial put it, we flourish not by besting others, but by being part of the something greater than ourselves. By clamoring for status, we deprive ourselves of the one thing that would actually help us, each other. The author goes on, but if the drum major instinct is poison, there is an antidote. Let's call it the drummer's instinct, an urge not to lead the parade, but to be part of it, in rhythm with others, creating something together that no one could alone. The drum major instinct zooms us in on ourselves, but the drummer's instinct drives us to care for the bandmates. In fact, study after study shows that when we connect with and truly serve one another, we lead more joy-filled lives, less employee turnover, less burnout, higher levels of performance, and longer, healthier lives. When we are given the option, in word or in deed, to make connections or make divisions with each other, I beg of you to help make connections. So first and foremost in this conversation about making more intentional ripples with our lives, let's start by living lives that further connect us. Let's live lives not as drum majors striving to be first, to be in the front, but instead as drummers finding rhythm, finding commonalities with one another. Second, when we consider ways to make more intentional ripples with our lives, I propose we need to increase our connection to the world around us. We need to look outward more often. We need to turn from navel gazing, inward focus, especially in our current selfie culture, and turn toward global gazing, outward, through true community engagement. In today's society, increasing our awareness of the world is both easier and more difficult. It's easier to physically do, but harder to mentally process. It's easier because information is constantly at our fingertips. Cell phones, laptops, travel opportunities everywhere. But increasing our awareness of the world is also more difficult because the sheer volume of information constantly staring us in the face can cause attention fatigue. Listen to these facts about just how much information our brains are coping with. As of 2019, YouTube reported more than 500 hours of content is uploaded every minute. Here's another fact that will hit all of us close to home. American workers now receive an average of 126 emails a day. That's just your work account. And 60% of email is opened from a mobile device, meaning you're most likely doing other things at the same time. And if you were alive in 1986, here's a fun fact to put things in perspective. In 2011, Americans took in 5 times as much information every day as they did in 1986. That's the equivalent of reading 174 additional newspapers every single day. That's the difference from 1986 to 2011. As you can see, our brains are trying to process a lot of information every minute of every day. It's a lot to take in when you turn your attention outward. Attention fatigue is real. Attention fatigue, by definition, is when you take in too much information to process and your brain shuts down. Attention fatigue leaves people feeling unmotivated and tired. No wonder we're exhausted. Our minds are on overload. It's also more difficult to look outward at the world because there are so many global issues in the world to think through and to consider. Just to name a few of the overwhelming number of issues in the world. College student debt hit an all-time high in 2019 at $1.41 trillion. Another issue, since 2012, there's been a 57% increase in reported human trafficking cases nationwide. And many of the issues in the world today don't have clear responses. Should I throw my plastic bottle in the recycling can, or does that actually take more fossil fuel to break it down and make it into something else? Should we allow freshwater diversions in coastal states like Louisiana to save cities from flooding, even though those diversions are killing hundreds and thousands of saltwater animals, including over 135 dolphins in the past year? I even just read an article the other day saying that one of the largest carbon footprints today is now from all the servers that are needed to store our email. So now that we're thoroughly overwhelmed, looking inward or staying in our bubble and living on our own island doesn't sound so bad after all. Forcing ourselves to look outward more often is definitely easier with the access to information that we now have. But clearly, the amount of information and the number of global issues make it very overwhelming. But we don't have to live in this either-or mentality, staying on our personal islands or constantly feeling overwhelmed. They don't have to be our only two choices. So let's go back to this question of how do we stay informed about the world's issues so that we can have an intentional impact and intentional ripples with our lives, but not spiral out of control with information overload and attention fatigue? I suggest we use a framework for our efforts. When things aren't organized, including our thoughts, they can feel more overwhelming than need be. Recognizing the overwhelming nature of global issues and all the information at our fingertips, the United Nations created a list of 17 goals, what they call the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as a way to globally focus our efforts. These are a great starting point to work from. I encourage people who want to have an intentional impact with their life to reflect on which social issues they might be most passionate about. What do they want to spend the minutes and hours of their life focused on? Then, I encourage them to align with one or two top global goals, or SDGs, listed here. I also remind them that they can always come back to the list as passions and priorities in life change. Then, I encourage the use of another framework. It's called the Active Citizen Continuum, originally developed by an organization, Breakaway. The organization trains alternative break students and staff. This continuum can serve as a great tool and framework to guide all of us to deeper level impact in our communities. For those who haven't previously heard me speak about this framework, let me walk through it. We are each members of one, if not multiple communities. More or less, as long as you're breathing, congratulations, you've made it to the first stage of the continuum. This next stage, the volunteer stage, this is your first stage of action. You may not know what you're doing or even why you're doing it, but you are doing something in the community. People in this stage are well-intentioned, but may not be well-educated. Examples of this stage might be found most often when an organization requires a number of service hours or mandates a day of service for their group. Maybe a friend convinced you to do a service project with them on a Saturday morning. In those cases, you don't have a lot of information going into the experience about the social issue that you're working toward, or even why the service you're doing matters. Conscientious citizen. This stage is about asking the deeper questions. It's an opportunity to learn and to educate yourself about the issue. In the last stage, we may see people who volunteer on a weekly basis at the same place. Maybe it's a food pantry or a shelter. They're very dedicated and don't miss a week. Those volunteers become conscientious citizens when they dig much more deeply into the root causes behind the need or the issue at hand. It's when those weekly volunteers start to ask, why am I seeing the same homeless individuals here each week? Or what societal or interpersonal issues are influencing this issue? They start to drill more deeply into the social issue. Is there legislation that needs to be considered that would improve the situation? Or if not, should there be? Are there other social issues that need to be addressed in connection to this issue? Maybe you start to see that mental health or landlord-tenant laws or immigration issues, maybe many of those play an influencing role in the issue of poverty. In this stage, you dig deep to find the root causes of social issues. Active citizenship. And finally, after asking many questions and learning as much as you can, this final stage is where you start to create and implement solutions at those newfound deeper layers of the issue. Solutions in this stage might be the creation of a new piece of technology, creating a new community action committee, promoting candidates for office that support action that you've identified as necessary to solve an issue. The list goes on, but this stage is about creating solutions to those root causes. This framework allows us to be much more intentional with the impact of our lives. When it comes to our life, we only get the minutes here that we get. Instead of just hoping that our ripples went in the direction that we wanted them to, we can ensure deep and meaningful work through the use of the same amount of time. For example, you might be that person that goes to the same food pantry or the same nursing home week after week at your set day and time. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's great. You're serving those populations in amazing ways. Where I'm challenging us is in the area of impact and intentionality in that impact. What do you care about deeply? Have you stopped to ask yourself that question? With our busy, constantly double-booked lives, it's easy to never really consider what you care most deeply about or what you want your life to have influenced in the world. Not just your family, maybe kids or a house or your life. Remember, we're all connected. It's not just about you, but what do you want your life to have influenced in the world? Take a moment to do that right now. Pause and consider, what issues do you care most deeply about in the world? If I handed you a magic wand and let you rid the world of one and only one global issue, what would you choose? If that feels too big a question, maybe fall back to the United Nations list of 17 goals and maybe you can pick one of these. Let's say, hypothetically, you picked water issues, or looking at this list, number 14, life below water. You want some of your life's ripples, some of the impact of your life, to be about improving water issues. Maybe you already volunteer somewhere locally. Maybe you've been living in that volunteer stage for a long time, and you're ready to be even more intentional with your ripples. Walking through a framework like the Active Citizen Continuum, I would encourage you, if your passion is water issues, to really dig into the why around those water issues. Even if you spend less time volunteering in order to spend more time diving deep, we'll all be better for it. Step into that conscientious citizen staging, go to the speakers on that topic, read articles while you're on the treadmill, listen to podcasts while you're on your way to work. Meet with people over lunch who study this. Dive into whatever it is that you care about. Then I would encourage you to take your impact, your ripples to the next level. Maybe you asked the questions and found that, in this instance, that pesticides and pollutants are the root causes of many of our water issues. Then step into active citizenship and develop great solutions to that. In this stage, for you, this might mean something like calling or writing or even meeting with elected officials to make sure that they are taking steps to fix the issues that you have identified. Maybe it's something bigger for you, like petitioning or peacefully protesting organizations that use pesticides that are harming water. The joy of this framework is that you can take the world's issues, zero in on the global issues that you want your impact to be about, and work through the stages at your own pace. In fact, you can move back and forth and potentially even through different root causes. With the water example that I just described, maybe it was pesticides this year, but next year you become more interested in rising water levels. Then maybe the following year you have a health scare and suddenly quality and affordable healthcare becomes the most pressing social issue in your life. You can start the whole framework over again, walking the continuum within the context of affordable healthcare. This truly is and should be a framework that can be used again and again to better connect with each other and the world around us. Let it be a framework that guides our ripples and helps each of us be more intentional with the impact of our lives. In It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey saw how deeply we are all connected, that every life sends ripples in ways we may never know. It's my hope today that we each leave with a deeper appreciation for the ways we impact each other, but that we also leave with the motivation and framework to make each of our ripples and all of our impact the most intentionally positive it can be. Here's to you, your intentional ripples, and all the wonderful lives that you lead.